This is the DRS train.
Welcome to the DRS Train podcast. This service is the DRS Detours, looking at the 2024 World Endurance Championship. I'm your driver, Peter Brook, and your conductors today are Nav F1 and returning guest Ace Shield. Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi, Peter. Looking forward to covering our very first DRS detour.
Hi, everybody.
Also joining us, we have a new guest today, one of the leading WEC content creators, Formula Jonah. Jonah, welcome to the DRS Train podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, obviously, this is normally a Formula One channel, and we're going a bit off-piste, I think, to cover WEC. For me, I suppose my knowledge of it is a bit touch and go, but one of the things I've noticed, because of course the season starts this weekend along with Formula One, with the very specific 1,812 kilometres of Qatar, the main thing I've noticed is the very large expansion of the hypercar category. So for any kind of new or returning fans, what would you say are the main things to look out for in WEC this year?
I think that you mentioned it, hypercar is number one to look out for. The category is going through a huge new golden era. It's the most cars we've ever seen on the grid, and I think that it's going to really show why hypercar is successful this season. I think another thing to look forward to is the new era of GT racing in the WEC this season with the introduction of the GT3 regulations. It's going to be absolutely incredible.
Because it seems to have it surprised me a bit. It seems to have gone down to just two categories now, because I'm used to having, hypercar, and then there's LMP1, LMP2, and then all these GTE ones. So have they just essentially got rid of some of those completely, or just condensed it down to two categories with them all merged together?
So yeah, it's kind of complicated, to be honest, and this is why I've made a ton of videos on YouTube to kind of explain it all. So LMP1 effectively became hypercar in 2020. The LMP1 regulations went completely gone from the WEC, and the new regulations of Le Mans hypercar and Le Mans Daytona H, or LMH and LMDH, replaced the LMP1 regulations. And they were formed in the new category of hypercar. IMSA also has their other category as well, which is GTP, which runs the same regulations, which is really cool, to be honest. But of course, we're talking about WEC today. LMP2 was on the grid until 2023, last year. And because of the ever-expanding hypercar grid and even the new GT category coming in, which I'll mention in just a moment, made the LMP2 class basically just go away. But we will see the LMP2 cars at Le Mans this year, which is a huge thing to say. LMP2 racing is very, very competitive, very cool to see all these teams come in. But of course, there's no room for it on the grid. And then, of course, we have LMGT3, which is just a fantastic category coming in with the new GT3 regulations. Gone are the old GTE regulations, which have been in the WEC for quite some time. And instead of the Pro, GTE Pro, or GTE AM, now it's just GT3 or LMGT3, where the GT3 regulations and GT3 cars are out on track. So I think now we just have two primary categories with LMP2 at Le Mans exclusively.
Yeah, I think the good thing with just having two categories is that it's very easy to present to people. So you can just tell people, oh, you have those prototypes, which are just not cars you will see in your daily life. And then you have your GT category, which people are also familiar with. So that's one thing I feel like WEC has done well with. It's more presentable to people, and it's easier just to talk about. You just tell people, you've got those two categories, which are very different. And also the main attraction this year is all the brands that are in both categories. So starting with hypercar, why don't you just give us a rundown of all those different brands who are just going to be battling it out?
Yeah, as you said, there's quite a lot of brands on the grid this year. The most we've ever seen in hypercar in the category's history since its inaugural season in 2021. So give me a moment as I'm going to go through them all, because there's a lot of names. So we got Toyota, Ferrari, Peugeot, Cadillac, Porsche, Alpine, BMW, Lamborghini, and Isotta Fraschini. So a total of 9 brands in hypercar, which is just incredible. I mean, last season we had 7. 2 brands, Glickenhaus and Van Wall, decided they're done. You know, Glickenhaus is ending their project. Van Wall's entry was rejected. So 5 are returning from last season, 4 new ones coming in as well. And it's just absolutely incredible. So 9 overall in hypercar, which is incredible.
Formula One could only dream of having those kind of brands on the grid, I think, at the moment.
Indeed.
Yes, and in hypercar, we have 2 different regulations. We have the Le Mans hypercar, which is the regulations made by FIA and ACO together. And then they made it so that also the Le Mans Daytona hybrid regulations also are allowed to race in hypercar. And these regulations were made by IMSA in North America. And so this merging of the 2 regulations is the main strength behind WEC this year, because many constructors, when they had the choice to make one car and race in 2 categories, and they all found it incredibly good, and many constructors are coming, maybe also Acura. And for now, from the Le Mans Daytona hybrid regulations, we have Cadillac, Porsche, BMW, Lamborghini, and Alpine. And Alpine is the only one who races exclusively in WEC, right?
Correct, yep.
And I was going to ask both of you, Jonah and Ace, why don't you tell us a bit about this brand, Isotta Fraschini? Because this is not a name that just runs around in the streets like Toyota and BMW.
Ace, do you want to start?
Okay, I'll start. So, Isotta Fraschini is a very old Italian car manufacturer, and for many decades it basically stopped doing anything, but it never went bankrupt. And recently a new group of investors have picked up the team, and they have designed a new project, and that is design a new car, the Tipo 6. And this car is gonna come in 3 different configurations: the competition, street, and I remember correctly, Corse, which is basically sporting for amateurs. And the idea behind this project is we make this car, we go racing in WEC on Sundays, and then we win, we get podiums, we have success, and then we can sell our cars on the next day, on Monday. And on this business model, they plan to relaunch the entire brand.
That's a great explanation of Isotta Fraschini. Prestigious Italian manufacturer from Milano, Italy. And it's interesting too because, like you mentioned, Isotta Fraschini they're kind of old, but we haven't heard from them for quite some time. And this is something I always tell my viewers because it's an interesting fact, but Isotta Fraschini is actually the oldest Italian manufacturer in hypercar this season. Ferrari and Lamborghini were founded after them. Isotta Fraschini was founded in 1900, all the way back then. And the project is small, but it's going to be interesting to see out on track. The Tipo 6 LMH Competizione, that's their hypercar for 2024. And it's got key components on it as well, such as Michelotto coming in, WEC Technologies as well, and in collaboration with the engine supplier HWA. This is an Isotta Fraschini engine, just in collaboration with HWA. And it's awesome. And the team running the entry as well is called Duquesne, which also raced in the ELMS Championship, otherwise known as European Le Mans Series. And it's just going to be awesome to see Isotta Fraschini on the grid.
Yes, and the point behind Isotta Fraschini is not only that they are an old Italian brand which are trying to make it big again, is that they also have a very ambitious project. Before we had Van Wall and Glickenhaus, which were in a similar situation. They were not big constructors, and they tried to make it big, but they ultimately failed. They dropped out. and Isotta Fraschini is gonna do things differently. They're gonna go all in. They decided to make a hybrid engine, and so they're gonna take batteries, and they're gonna challenge Ferrari, Toyota, and the other manufacturers of Le Mans hypercar, which are, give me a moment, the other one is Peugeot, right? And they're gonna challenge head-to-head with the hybrid technology. And this is a very demanding task, because obviously all these three constructors are far ahead, are far more experienced. And so Isotta Fraschini is truly the underdog this season, and everyone wants to see them do well. And final anecdote is that the engine they're using is a V6 3 liters turbocharged but monoturbo, which basically means the engine is very similar to the Formula One engines, and they're the only car on track doing this, so they're the only car that sounds like a Formula One car this year.
Definitely a team that's going to be a fan favorite. You really sold it well to us there, Ace. One last thing with the cars I think that Jonah should address is that 9 brands does not mean 9 teams. Some teams are there using cars, customer cars. So maybe just talk about those Ferraris and those Porsches who are not going to be factory team owned, but just, the Jotas and all the others.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of teams on the grid. I'll quickly go through the rest of them, but primarily talk about the customer entries. So yeah, you got like Toyota Gazoo Racing running the Toyota project, Peugeot Peugeot Sport Total Energies running the Peugeot project. But those customer entries, there's Hertz Team Jota running a Porsche 963, and not one, but 2 in the WEC this year. And they have strongly committed to not just battling the factory cars, but also beating them, which is incredible because this is a customer brand. Remember that. It's a customer brand. Penske is the factory operation running the Porsche 963s, and Hertz Team Jota is just showing that they have the pace as well. But they're not the only customer brand. Proton Competition, German team, used to race in the GT ranks and is now making the step up to hypercar. They are racing in both the WEC and IMSA as well, actually. And they have one 963, could have a potential second one at Le Mans, which is yet to be confirmed, of course, as it is on the reserve list. So there's those entries. There's also a customer Ferrari 499P, and the way you can tell the difference between the factory and the customer entry, and this is brilliant by Ferrari, by the way, and AF Corsa, is that entry is yellow. It's a yellow Ferrari, and the factory cars are primarily red. And that's really cool to see. The customer car is an AF Corsa run entry, and the factory cars are Ferrari AF Corsa. So slightly different. I know it kind of seems similar, but they are somewhat different. And then Cadillac also has 2 teams as well. There's Chip Ganassi Racing running the full season number 2 blue Cadillac. And at Le Mans, there's also another team as well, Action Express Racing, which won the 2023 IMSA GTP Championship.
One instant question arises from a Formula One fan to the WEC fan that you are. You said that Jota wants to be the factory team. How is it perceived in the endurance world? How are Porsche reacting? Are they like, yeah, sure, just bring the fight and we'll see what happens? Or would it be like Formula One, where if a factory team is supplying the engine to a customer team, they would not want that team to beat them, and they might even resort to some rumors of underpowered engines by 10 or 12 horsepower here and there?
To my knowledge, Porsche is pretty chill, to be honest. I think that they're pretty open to have Hertz Team Jota and Proton Competition on board. And I think the main thing is that they're all kind of working as a group. You know, it's all Porsche in general, but it's Hertz Team Jota coming in, Proton Competition as well. And it's just great to see. And I wanted to mention something else as well, but we'll get on to the driver lineup, which is going to be very astonishing and just kind of proves Hertz Team Jota's commitment into hypercar.
So the point with Porsche, if you want to draw a parallel with Formula One, Porsche is basically the equivalent of Mercedes. They're supplying many teams, they're supplying good engines to those teams, and they want to beat them fair and square. And if they get beaten by their customer teams, then it just means they can do a better job. And another important point is that this plan of having many customers team is the policy of the Porsche brand. They decided to debut in 2023 with many cars immediately. They have a total of 8 cars in 2023. 4 in IMSA and 4 in WEC, so they could gather a lot of data very quickly, so they immediately know which directions to go for development. So not every team does this tries this because it could prove problematic to supply so many cars and then give assistance to so many teams. But Porsche took on the challenge and tried to gain from the strengths rather than the problems.
And it's incredible, right, how in the endurance world and Formula E, you get factory teams who do not mind getting beaten by customer teams, whereas in Formula One, that would just never be tolerated, really. So, yeah, moving on from the teams to the drivers, and there's a reason that we spoke about the teams first. The endurance world isn't like Formula One. It's not about the drivers usually, it's about the cars. You usually hear about the winners be, for example, last year, it's the number 51. It's not Antonio Giovinazzi, it's not James Calado, it's the number 51 car. So the drivers are always talked about after you mention the team, the car, the brand, whatever. So yeah, Jonah, why don't you just tell us a bit about some of the standout drivers who should be competing, because again, the standout drivers in endurance are not always the most famous drivers. And after that, because there are a lot of Formula One drivers on the grid this year, ex-Formula One drivers on the grid this year, I would love to hear a bit from Peter and what he has to think about it.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of drivers on the grid this year for the WEC. A lot of famous names, not just across Hypercar, but LMGT3 as well in the GT world. With Hypercar, you have names such as Kevin Estre, Andre Lauderer in Porsche, Michael Christensen as well, a part of the Porsche brand. With the Hertz team, Jota as well, you got the 2009 Formula One world champion Jenson Button as part of the group as well. We can get into more Formula One drivers in just a moment. Mick Schumacher, Nicolas Lapierre with Alpine, among some other drivers as well. Then you have like Antonio Fiocco, Alessandro Pierguidi with Ferrari. Danny Hucadella is with, I believe, Corvette. I'm not exactly sure on that, but over in the GT ranks. You have other drivers such as Valentino Rossi, very, very special driver joining, MotoGP champion, coming in with BMW WRT. There are so many names. I mean, Kamui Kobayashi, Mike Conway with Toyota, Alex Lynn, Earl Bamber with Cadillac, Sebastian Bourdais, another driver that from Formula One coming in to race at in the WEC at Le Mans. And at Qatar, actually, this weekend. And another driver I quickly want to mention as well, and this is someone who's not really known in the Formula One community, but known over in the States in IndyCar, Scott Dixon. Scott Dixon is a very famous driver, 6-time IndyCar champion, and he's coming over to race with Cadillac at Le Mans as well. So I could go on and on and on, but there's a lot of drivers in this list for WEC in 2024, and yeah, just so many great, talented racers that we could go on and on talking about.
So I suppose for me and a lot of F1 fans who maybe are fairly new to WEC, the main thing that would ease us in is seeing that, as you mentioned, there are a lot of ex-F1 drivers. I mean, there are actually 16, in fact, doing hypercars. So, I mean, I've got them here. If I just read the names quickly, we've got Jenson Button, Kamui Kobayashi, Sebastian Buemi, Brendan Hartley, Robert Kubica, Jean-Eric Verne, Sebastian Bourdais, Nick de Vries, Romain Grosjean, Mick Schumacher, Antonio Giovinazzi, Jack Aitken, Daniel Kvyat, Paul de Resta, Stoffel van Dorn, and Andre Lotterer. So that's quite a mixture from in terms of what they achieved in F1, because we've got people like Jenson Button, who was a former champion, and then we've got people like Lotterer and Jack Aitken, who did one race in Formula One. Yeah, I mean, there are some people here. I mean, Kobayashi, he's been doing WEC for years now. He's won several WEC titles and Le Mans with Toyota. Bourdais been doing it a long time, the same with Brendan Hartley. Admittedly, this is back when they were either competing against Porsche or Toyota or nobody else and just inter-team battles between themselves. So it's probably not going to be quite so easy with this many teams in hypercar. But there are a couple of ones that surprised me. I mean, Nick De Vries, bit of a failed campaign in Formula 1, but then he's won Formula 2 and Formula E. If this goes well, I guess he can continue his career of stat padding, basically, and winning titles in every category. Mick Schumacher, people are talking about because he's joined the Alpine team. And I think a lot of people are convinced he's going to go back to Formula 1. I don't necessarily think that's the case. And to be honest, he may as well give this a go and it could work out for him because obviously his father was doing what at the time was the World Sports Car Championship before he did Formula 1, and he had a lot of success there with Sauber Mercedes. So yeah, quite a mix of drivers there to think about. I suppose one thing that strikes me is that Jenson Button, as a winner of the Monaco Grand Prix, if he wins Le Mans, he's completed 2 of the 3 categories criteria to win the Triple Crown of Motorsport. And of course, you mentioned he's not an F1 driver, Alexander Rossi. If he was to win the WEC title, I think that would technically make him the first person since John Surtees, in fact, to win a world championship.
Valentino Rossi. Alexander Rossi is the American driver.
Yeah. Valentino Rossi, not Alex Rossi. Yeah, he won Indy, didn't he? Yeah. Valentino Rossi. That's what I meant to say. Is that he would become the first world champion on 2 and 4 wheels since John Surtees in the 60s, which would be huge actually, because you wouldn't really think that was possible. I suppose if we talk about Rossi, obviously motorbikes, how do you think he's going to do on 4 wheels?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see Rossi in a different type of racing to what he's done previously, but I think he was interested from the very beginning to join BMW. And the thing is, too, is that he's been with WRT, who runs the BMWs, before. And actually this year, in fact, he raced at the Bathurst 12-hour at Mount Panorama in Australia with the exact team. So he's got experience already in GT. He's already done a few races with BMW. This is his first time coming into the WEC and also first time coming into Le Mans, though. So I think that for the first couple of races, like I'm talking Qatar and Imola, he may struggle. Although, now thinking about it, Rossi has, I believe, raced at Qatar. My MotoGP knowledge is not very good, so I could be wrong there. But considering Losail is a track that MotoGP has raced on in the past, Rossi may already have experience from that. But of course, this is totally different to motorcycle racing. This is car racing. This is endurance racing, which is a very different ballgame. But I think he'll do well. But I think it may take him a few races to kind of get up to speed and get back into things. But eventually, I think he'll be a standout driver in that pairing at WRT in the number 46 LMGT3 effort.
So of course, Rossi will be in the GT category, which we will look into more detail in a bit. I wanted to ask Ace though. So this year in the hypercar category, there are 3 Italian teams, 5 Italian drivers, 7 Italian drivers in the GT3 category, and of course, Isota Fraschini is trying to make a comeback. How is just Italy looking at the endurance championship this year? Is there a lot of hype, or has there been a lot of attention this year in particular with all the drivers and all the teams, or is it the same as it has been for the last few years?
I would say it's not much different than last year, but then I would add that last year the hype was there was focus on hypercar. There was much focus on what Ferrari was gonna do and if they were gonna win the 24-hour of Le Mans, and on why they dropped off at the end of the season. So I'd say this hype simply is gonna carry on from 2024, because we should remember that Isotta Fraschini right now is the underdog. From the prologue, which we had yesterday and today, they're not looking hot, and honestly, they shouldn't be looking hot yet. They need time to know the car, to understand the setup, how it works, how to extract the maximum performance, and pretty much the same is also valid for Lamborghini, which, if I am not wrong, they only have one car in WEC, so they too are gonna have to need to work before they get results. And so the hype is simply is gonna focus again on Ferrari, and the objective is to get more victories with Ferrari, and I'd say it's not much different, but there is definitely focus on WEC. That was not the case before 2023. It's good. And I'd say for motorsport in Italy, WEC is looking good, yes, but not at the level of Formula One yet.
Yeah, as you said, Lamborghini has one entry in WEC, but two in Le Mans, which Romain Grosjean will be driving for. We spoke about this on DMs, Ace, but you have a specific view on Isotta Fraschini's lineup this year. So as we said, the hypercar category is stacked with talent, both from Formula One or just from names that you will know from the endurance world. Isotta Fraschini has gone with a lineup that will be surprising a lot of people. So if I just say the names, it's Jean-Charles Vernet, French driver, Antonio Serravalle, Canadian driver, and Cole Bennett, who's racing under the Thai license. Two of those are not even 21 and have very little experience. I believe Cole Bennett is jumping from regional F4 to hypercar, which is just insane to think about. But you told me that it might be the right thing to do from Isotta Fraschini.
Yes, so the discussion I'm gonna make is gonna be a very broad one. It's gonna cover Formula One, so bear with me for 5 to 10 minutes. So the idea behind this lineup for Isotta Fraschini is to have one experienced driver. In this case, is Jean-Charles Vernet, which also helped develop the car last year to get it ready for the championship. And they're gonna side alongside him two rookies, two inexperienced drivers. And these two drivers are expected to learn from Vernet and slowly get up to speed and finally get used to the car and their job of driving it. And this is surprising, as you say, because having two inexperienced drivers impact a lot of the performance. We should understand that in endurance, driver matters even less than in Formula One for the final result, if the result is good. While instead, if there are problems with the cars, if there are mistakes, then the drivers get blamed. So it's a very tough job being a driver in WEC, because if you win a race, you don't win it alone. You won with your crew and with the team which prepared your car. So the single contribution matters much more in case you make a mistake, and not in case you pulled an incredible result that is very hard to see in Formula One. And so there are doubts when you bring two inexperienced drivers. They can crash often, they could simply be off the pace, and it's gonna take a lot of time before you fix this, if it is fixable at all, because maybe these two drivers are not that good, and maybe their natural speed is simply 1.5 seconds of everyone else. And so it's very risky what Isotta Fraschini is doing. But I believe in them because this approach is an approach which favors the young drivers. You be a young driver, you trust him, and you give him a big responsibility, you give him a big job, and then you teach him, you you open up the way in front of him for him to improve, and then slowly, after a year or a year and a half, once he gets used to the job, once he learns, then he's gonna give back to you all the things he learned, all the experience he built up, and then he's gonna deliver, he's gonna be helpful. This approach is the same one which used Minardi in Formula One, and we all saw how often Minardi pulled well above their own weights. And so I believe that this approach of trusting in the younger drivers, giving them a chance, even though it might not be the best choice in the short to medium term, I believe this approach can definitely work. And so I'm not too worried. Besides, in Formula One right now, there is a problem of the younger drivers, the drivers that are coming, the rookies, and we say that they do not get enough track testing. They can only do simulation, and that is not very representative of actual track conditions and how you race in Formula One. And so they often underperform, they disappoint, and so maybe we keep them there for 3 years, and maybe just after 3 years you see that they're finally good, but you've given them 3 years, and in Formula One this is not acceptable, and so they get dropped off. We saw with Nick DeVries, we're seeing this with Logan Sargent. I'm very happy with Williams, which gave him another chance, even though the first season was very disappointing. And I hope Logan Sargent can show that he has improved and that he's learning. And then we saw previously with Antonio Giovinazzi, with Brandon Hartley, with many other drivers, which they were given a chance, a very short one, and they were not able to be up to speed, but they were not even given the chance, a real chance, a good 3 years to learn, and then, only then, see if they actually are good enough for Formula One. We don't get that in Formula One. I am very happy to see that in endurance. There are teams that are willing to take this approach. There are teams willing to take the risk, because I believe that it is worth it. This risk of taking inexperienced driver, inexperienced personnel, so mechanics, engineers, I think this risk is well worth it, and it's gonna pay off.
Yeah, that's really well said, Ace. I think one of the best examples of this is Ryo Hirakawa joining the Toyota Gazoo team. When was it, Jonah? Was it a year ago or 2 years ago? And it was very risky because he was seen as quite inexperienced. And they all said, when I think there was one race in particular where he made a mistake, and they were all very supportive and said that that's not an issue at all. He will learn and he will come good.
Yeah, it was a risk. I think he joined in 2022. I could be wrong. He joined the number 8 crew when Nakajima, I believe, retired or moved aside from the Toyota role. And I think the race you might be mentioning was the 24 Hours of Le Mans last year when he made a mistake at Arnage spinning off at the corner. And I believe that cost Toyota a chance of winning because the 8 car was in a chance of taking first from the 51 Ferrari. And Toyota really put their arm around his shoulder and said, "Hey, it's okay. We do this as a team, you know." And that kind of proved to me that they're taking faith in their young drivers, and that goes for all teams in the WEC. And they're really showing like that they're one as a team, you know. And that's why I like endurance racing so much, because it's a team sport. It's not a driver sport, and we saw that at the IMSA Rolex 24 at Daytona this year when Porsche Penske Motorsport were in a battle with Cadillac. A lot of people watched that race. It was very intense. And one of that pit stops at the final hour, I believe it was, got them ahead of the Cadillac. And it was a different strategy there, but that was a team. It wasn't just down to the driver. It was down to the team itself. So Ryo Hirakawa is a great example of a driver kind of new to that sort of thing. And a team like Toyota taking him in was, I think, really respectable. It gave me a lot of respect for TGR And that goes for other teams as well when they make a decision like that.
Yeah, there's one big value from endurance for sure, which is the drivers matter less than the team and the car. And I would say no category shows it better than the GT category, and that leads us to talk about LMGT3. Lots of brands there as well, lots of cars. Again, run us through it, Jonah.
Yeah, so in LMGT3, we actually have the same amount of same amount of manufacturers as we do in Hypercar. 9 brands are on the grid, but they're different brands than Hypercar. Some similar, some not, and here we go. So we have Porsche, Ferrari, BMW, Lexus, who's joining in for the WEC for the very first time, Lamborghini, McLaren, Ford, who's returning to Le Mans, which is great to see, Chevrolet, Aston Martin, I believe, is the final one. So 9 brands there. Some of them are racing in Hypercar as well as LMGT3, like Ferrari, like Porsche, like BMW and all that. But there's some new that are coming in, like McLaren joining Le Mans for the first time since the 90s, I believe. And we know McLaren has success at Le Mans, winning at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1995, which was a very, very historic win for a GT car as well. At Le Mans. So yeah, 9 manufacturers in LMGT3, the same amount of Hypercar, and if Hypercar is going to be good, I think we can bet that LMGT3 is going to be pretty successful as well.
Yeah, just looking at the list, I've seen Ford. They're using a Mustang, which sounds absolutely brilliant to me because that's not something I'd pictured at Le Mans. It makes me think of the Garage 54. Is that what they called it? That NASCAR, that
56.
Garage 56 that ran at Le Mans last year. You need just that kind of one entry that's different, even if they're in their own class. It's just something kind of that makes it more fun. I mean, that's another, again, to have that variety. Formula One could only dream of that. It all just sounds really interesting that even though we've gone down from 4 or 5 classes to 2, it's a really high quality of teams and drivers involved.
True, yeah, and I think that's the beauty of endurance racing. Like, for instance, Le Mans. I mean, we're going to have 2 classes across the season, but like I said earlier, LMP2 is joining for Le Mans with 16 or so cars on the grid, which makes up a 62-car grid at Le Mans. And this is the fascinating thing about endurance racing, and I'm just going to quickly go into this, because in F1, for example, we have a car battling for position. For instance, and this is probably never going to happen, that often this season. Max Verstappen in the lead of the race trying to defend against the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. There's a battle going on there for the race lead, or for some example. But endurance racing is different. And the reason why it is because if you have a car, like for instance, a Porsche GT car versus a Ferrari GT car, they're battling for position. They're battling for the race lead. It's a very intense battle. But not only do they have to be focusing on their battle, they have to focus on the other class's battle, because at the same time you have another battle going on in Hypercar with a Porsche and a Ferrari, and they're also trying to battle for their overall race lead at the same time that the GT battle is happening. And that's happening on the same part of the track. That happens all the time in endurance racing. And so it's multitasking at its brilliant part of it. And that's endurance racing. That's how it is. And it's not one race going on, it's multiple. And at Le Mans, there's 3 races going on: LMP2, LMGT3, and Hypercar, of course. And they're all in different battles, and that is just what's incredible about it.
Peter, can you imagine if Hamilton and Russell were squabbling for position and they're having to lap an 18-year-old Ollie Behrman and a 17-year-old Kimi Antonelli, who have their entire career to think about? I
mean, to be fair, I would love that if they tried to put Formula 2 and Formula 3 in with Formula 1, and then we end up with 72 cars in one race. I mean, it would be fascinating, but also nothing would happen because it would just be endless red flags and crashes from the F3 drivers and kind of ruining it. But that's the thing that makes me think of, because I watch Le Mans every year. I don't usually watch the other endurance events. The one thing that always amazes me is that if you're at the back in the lower classes, within probably 2 or 3 laps, you're already going to start getting lapped. And you spend effectively the entire race ceding to blue flags. I feel like that must be a nightmare for both the drivers and also, I guess, marshals and race control to actually, particularly when you're several hours into the race, to recognize when you're being lapped or actually if it's for position. Do you have much insight into how they actually work that out with logistics, or is it just that they have to look at timings very closely or whatever?
I think they do need to look at timings really closely, and I think it's just a lot of work that the marshals have to do. They have a similar system to Formula One where like the car number appears, and they say like, oh, car 49 needs to pass 48 or whatever. I think there's a lot of communication between the engineer saying like, okay, you got a hypercar, it's a Porsche behind you, just to let you know if you're a GT car, for example. And it's a lot of multitasking, as I said, and that's what makes it kind of interesting as well. But I'm just going to quickly point out something. I know, Ace, you got your hand up, so I don't want to take long. But in endurance racing, you have a car that is battling for position, and they get lapped, for example. But it's not the end of the race, and that's what's so interesting about endurance racing, and opposed to F1, where F1, once you're lapped, you're basically done. You know, it's very hard to get further into the race and get a good position. Where endurance racing is long, it's in the name, endurance. And where a car is lapped at Le Mans, for example, that's not the end. You could be like 7 laps down and still win the race. And that is so interesting to me, that you could be that far down and still have an opportunity to win. And I think that's why people continue, even if you're laps down, because you're able to have that drive, that ability to push forward. And the engineers constantly telling the driver, it's not over yet, we still got an opportunity, and it's not over until the checkered flag is there. And that's just another factor of why endurance racing is so cool.
So we were talking about lapping and marshals and how to manage this entire situation. Since our viewers aren't exactly expert on WEC, I'm just gonna take this chance and explain how the race neutralization mechanics works. So what I'm talking about is basically yellow flags and safety cars and red flags. So the race director has 3 different mechanisms to neutralize a race. The first one is a slow zone. Basically, for a portion of the track, every car is obliged to go at 80 kilometers per hour. Everywhere else on the track, they're free to race. Then we have the full course yellow. Cars are obliged to go at 80 kilometers per hour over the entire track. Finally, we have the safety car, which is the same as in Formula 1, except at Spa and Le Mans, which are very long tracks, we may have multiple safety cars. So for full course yellow and safety cars, we also have 2 further mechanisms. One is called the pass around, in which the cars that have the class leader behind them can overtake the safety car and then do an entire lap and get back. The other mechanism is the merge. If we have multiple safety cars on track, we can merge the entire field behind one safety car before the restart. Both these mechanisms are disabled 60 minutes before the race ends. And finally, for those who watched Le Mans last year, there was also a mechanism called the drop back, which was the mechanism which made the safety cars last an entire hour and wasn't exactly good. Well, this mechanism has been dropped, so it's no longer in use. We're not gonna see that this year. And yes, for full course yellow and safety car, the pit entry is closed for the first 3 laps, so cars cannot go in the pits. A car can only go in a pit if it has damage or if a tire blew up, for a tire failure, basically. And if they need to refuel, then they can enter the pit lane. They can only stop for 5 seconds, so put enough fuel for 1 lap, and then they have to get out behind the safety car. And if they need to do those 5 seconds of fuel, then when the safety car ends or the full course yellow, they are obliged to do the entire pit stop. That's it.
Yeah, that again, really well explained, Ace. I think that brings us to talking about the actual calendar and the tracks. So the season starts this Saturday with the Qatar 1812 kilometers, followed by the 6 hours of Imola, the 6 hours of Spa, the 24 hours of Le Mans, of course, the 6 hours of Sao Paulo, the 6 hours of Kota, which is now called the Lone Star Le Mans, the 6 hours of Fuji, and the 8 hours of Bahrain. So I know that Peter likes circuits a lot and likes criticizing or praising circuits. So I just wanted your point of view from a Formula One fan's point of view, your opinion on this calendar. And then, of course, Jonah can talk about the tracks that got dropped, maybe fairly or unfairly.
This might be a very stupid question, but are both classes racing at all of these circuits together?
Yes.
How on earth are they going to fit them all on? Because I get Le Mans is 7 miles long, so that's quite a long circuit. But some of these, I mean, Interlagos is barely 3 miles long and has lots of very tight.
They used to fit 4 categories on some of those.
But how? The thing is, you spend like in Le Mans, if you're one of the slower ones, you spend most of the race just blue flags constantly. That's going to be 100 times worse at somewhere like Interlagos or even Fuji, because those are about half the length of Le Mans. So how does that work? It just seems a bit too crowded.
So I'll just quickly answer this real quickly. That's why the WEC has limited their entry list to 37 cars, because some of the tracks don't have enough pit garages and don't have enough space to have this many cars. That's also another reason why LMP2 is gone, because there's literally no space at tracks like you mentioned, Interlagos, for example. So, like, for example, Van Wall last season, there was a whole talking thing. I made many videos on this because a lot of people were confused, like, why were they dropped? One of the reasons was because there was no space. And a lot of people were thinking, like, it's only just one more entry, why can't it be added? Well, another factor is because there's not enough pit garages, where, like, Le Mans, the reason why I can have 62 cars is not just because of the track layout, but because of the amount of pit garages for the cars that can enter. So that's why there's 62 cars at Le Mans versus an event like Spa, where there's only 37, or Qatar this weekend. Because like tracks like Interlagos are mainly for Formula One, and Formula One only has 20 entries, of course. And so, yeah, that's another factor as well. And hopefully that answers your question, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose 37, that is more manageable if you think, Formula 3, they've got 30 cars, and
Right.
Freca, it's around 30 as well. I know that with, I don't know if it's still the case, but definitely up until a few years ago, in both Freca and Formula E, they used to limit the entries at Monaco because there weren't enough spaces. The pit lane was too short. Yeah, because otherwise, 60 cars at Interlagos, that's not realistic. Generally, that's a good calendar. I mean, they've managed to fit 2 Middle Eastern races. I'm generally not a fan of having so many races in the Middle East, but I mean, Bahrain is a perfectly good track. I mean, I presume it's using the endurance layout, which has only been used once in Formula One, but or is it the
It's using the F1. It's using the
okay.
F1 Grand Prix layout, yeah.
Yeah, that's, ironic. You'd think they'd finally make some use for the endurance one, but maybe, I mean, the 2010 race was terrible at that for Formula One, so maybe they thought it's not better. But
what do you think is terrible? Alonso won on debut with Ferrari. What is terrible?
Yeah, but
about
Vettel
that?
should have won it and didn't.
One, too.
Yes.
Yeah. That's why it's bad. But Losail it was actually quite good for racing in Formula One. I mean, it's designed for motorbikes, but that one, I guess, there's going to be potential. I mean, we'll see in a few days. I suppose the main thing I'd be curious about is how the lap times compare to Formula One, because it seems like Hypercar is kind of closing in on F1 in terms of lap times. And I know that in the past, I mean, if you go way back in the 60s, Le Mans was faster because they had engine limitations in Formula One that meant they went down to like 200 horsepower. And I think in the 80s with Group B, not Group C. C, yeah, Group B is the rally cars. I think Group C, it was kind of there or thereabouts with Formula One. But I think Hypercar, they're not actually that far off, are they, on F1 pace?
So Porsche set in the prologue, the fastest time was a 1:40.4 by the number 5 Porsche. You guys probably know this more. What is the lap time from Qatar in qualifying for for F1 last year?
So last year in qualifying, the pole position was Max Verstappen with a 1:23.7. Maybe it's better to use the fastest lap from the race, so because we can confront better. The prologue wasn't actually qualifying, so it would be a bit unfair. In the race, the fastest lap was at 24.3. So it's 15 seconds slower.
That's quite a large amount. I think that's slower than Formula 2. I think Formula 2, that's faster than Formula 3, but yeah, that's slower than Formula 2 would do at Losail.
I think Jonah will also explain how the newer specifications have made the top category much slower than in 2020, because there was a comparison of, I think it was Bahrain, and the 2020 Toyota could lap 5 or 6, maybe, 6 seconds faster.
Yes, so here we have to talk about the Le Mans Hypercar and then the Le Mans Daytona Hybrid merging together of the regulations. So initially, the Le Mans Hypercar regulations were designed standalone, and so they were meant differently. Like Toyota built the engine for 1,000 horsepower, and then when they merged the two regulations together, the engine power was limited to 710 horsepower. So this, as a comparison, Formula 2 Mechachrome's engine are 620 horsepower. So they barely 100 horsepower more. And another important point is that Formula 1, Formula 2, and Formula 3, their objective is peak downforce, maximum performance in a narrow window, because that's the best way to get a peak downforce. The regulations for endurance are a completely different philosophy. So to balance the two regulations, they limit a minimum weight of 1,030 kilograms, a maximum power of 700 horsepower, but then they also limit the maximum downforce a car can generate, and also limit the aerodynamic efficiency of the car. So the objective with these cars in endurance isn't lap time. It is to achieve the limits imposed by the regulations under as a bigger window of conditions as possible. As often as possible, you must be at that 700 horsepower. As often as possible, you have to be at that limit of downforce. And so we get something very different from Formula 1.
Yeah, exactly. And usually one of the tracks where it's easiest to compare the lap times is Monza, which will not be figuring in the calendar this year, Jonah.
Yes, this is an interesting topic, Monza, because I think it kind of get the thought of Monza on the calendar kind of gets confused, and I'll explain why in a moment. But Monza is considered to be one of the greatest circuits in the history of the world, to be honest. That's how I perceive it. It's an amazing circuit, Monza. It's, of course, racing. F1 races there, of course. WEC used to race there. But why has it been removed? That is the question. A lot of people are kind of frustrated that it's not on the 2024 calendar, which is understandable. And I think a lot of people wonder, like, they're kind of confused why the WEC would remove it. I would say this is not the WEC's control. The reason why they've removed it is because Monza is doing resurfacing plans. They're resurfacing the track, which collides with the potential 6-hour event. The reason why is because the 6 hours of Monza was scheduled to be held actually in April this year. And because the Sao Paulo event, the 6 hours of Sao Paulo, or Rolex 6 hours of Sao Paulo as the sponsoring inquires, that is taking the place of where Monza was last year. So Monza had to be moved up. The reason why it's not on the calendar this year is because of the resurfacing, and that's planned around the same time of when the event was going to be scheduled. So it can't be happening, and there's no way that the WEC can move it around because there's not enough space on the calendar with IMSA coming in to frame the 24 hours of Nürburgring. There's too much endurance racing, and they already have enough calendar clashes with, like, for instance, IMSA, and so they can't move it around. So a trip to Imola is the best option for that. I don't know if this is a good time to mention the other two tracks, but I'll go ahead and say that. We also are not going to be seeing the Portimao circuit on the calendar this year. And another one that's big in the endurance racing world is the Sebring Speedway in America or the USA, in Florida specifically. Sebring proved to be quite bumpy for the WEC entries, and also it kind of collided with IMSA's event that was held there last year, the 12 Hours of Sebring, and continues to be held there every year. It's why it's called Super Sebring. And the WEC is also going to COTA this year, Circuit of the Americas. So having two US races probably wouldn't make sense. And Portimao, I think there was no room for it on the calendar. And it seems like the WEC goes there like every other year. They were there in 2021 and in 2023. They missed 2022. So maybe we'll be back for 2025 if we're going to do that leap year kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I just wanted, before we go into testing the prologue, which just took place, so we can just maybe have a little preview in terms of performance and what to expect this Saturday. Which circuit from the F1 calendar would you have in the endurance calendar if you could? And I'm just asking for a very simple answer and explanation. So Peter, Jonah, and Ace in order.
I'm trying to remember the Formula One calendar now off the top of my head. Okay, well, a serious one I think I would love to see is Silverstone. I mean, there's the Brit Car 24 Hours. I mean, that's like touring cars and stuff, and I think they have done it before. There's a 6-hour Silverstone race, I'm pretty certain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one, I mean, Silverstone's a brilliant circuit. The one that popped into my mind when they mentioned COTA was actually to see them go to Vegas, because I'll be honest, I feel like that's the circuit that would kind of work for them, because it has that massive long straight, and it has vibes of Le Mans. I mean, obviously, then you have the issues of you're shutting down the entire city for 24 hours, and the day to night transition. I mean, the heat would be probably a bit too much to handle during the day. But yeah, Silverstone I think would be a good one.
Yeah, Silverstone. Honestly, that was my pick, and I was going to say that as well. But since you already said that, I want to go with something different just to throw it out there. And I know this is probably never going to be able to happen, but Suzuka. I would love to see the WEC cars head to Suzuka. A brilliant circuit. I think it would be very good racing. However, we already have Fuji in Japan, and I think that's kind of where the WEC has kind of made their home. So realistically, the best option, I'm going to go for another circuit. I'm going to say Shanghai in China. I think that would be a good track for the WEC. Reason why I say that is because they've raced there before. The World Endurance Championship went there for, I believe, the 4 hours of Shanghai. Great racing. I mean, there was even cars such as Rebellion and Ginetta challenging for overall victory in the LMP1 days against the Toyotas, which was crazy at the time, considering Toyota is a giant manufacturer versus these small teams like Rebellion or Ginetta, for example. But yeah, Shanghai, I think, would be my pick. But if we're thinking out of the box, not realistically, it would be Suzuka.
So the reason they don't race at Suzuka is because Suzuka is Honda's track and Fuji is Toyota's track. So Honda is not in WEC, so they go to Toyota's track. And as for my pick, I thought that Spa was the best choice, but they already raced there, so I honestly am fine with the current WEC calendar, and I don't think there are many Formula One races which are worth more than Spa. And but if I really have to choose one, then I wanna be very evil, and I'll say the how it's called now, the Red Bull Ring. I wanna watch those cars pit and then exit 2 laps behind the leader just because they pitted. The track is so short, and in Formula One it offers a lot of racing, and I can only imagine what mayhem we're gonna see if Endurance goes to the Red Bull Ring.
It would be a great spectacle, because the thing about, even from a spectator perspective, you can see almost all of the circuit from certain grandstands because it's also condensed. It's the same with Interlagos as well. I was even going to say, as a joke one, to try Monaco just once to get fit 37. I mean, there wouldn't be a single overtake the whole the 24 hours of Monaco. I mean, it would be endless safety cars and full course yellows. But yeah, just give it a go just once and see if anyone even enjoys it. It'll probably be exhausting because the amount of concentration that you would need just not to crash.
I'm just imagining the 24 hours of Monaco. So you've got like Kobayashi coming in his number 7 Toyota, and he's stuck behind some Ford Mustang that's being driven by a gentleman driver and two kids whose best achievement was like 18th in FRECA. And he just gets sent into a wall because it starts raining. It would be chaotic for sure.
It would look stunning as well. At Monaco at night, it would look stunning, but yeah, it would never happen.
Yeah, it would not happen. Well, yeah. Let's finish this with some talk of the prologue that happened. The actual performance indicator for now, even though well, that's actually a good question. How much does WEC testing translate into actual performance throughout the season? Because Formula One testing also just took place, and famously, it's really hard to read into Formula One testing. You get some people going on glory runs, you think they're going to have a good season, and then they end up being 9th, and then you've got a team that just sandbagged all the way, and then they're dominating the season.
So can I take this one first before Jonah? Okay, so testing for endurance is very much different. So first I need to explain how development works for endurance. Each team, each brand validates a car for racing in endurance. This validation period is of 5 years, and within these 5 years they cannot change the car. They can only work on reliability. If they prove that they are lagging behind the rivals and they need to develop the car, and finally they have 5 tokens of development within this 5 years period. So what we basically see in testing is the same car as last year. It doesn't change as long as someone doesn't bring a development, doesn't use a token. So what we really need to look into the prologue today and yesterday is how Alpine, Lamborghini, Isotta Fraschini, and the other one, which I forgot.
BMW.
BMW, yes, thank you, are performing. And everything else is basically the same as before. As for development, I know that Peugeot is gonna bring their new car with a rear wing, with the different specification of tires. They're gonna have the larger tire at the rear, like everybody else is doing. And they also are gonna need to change the weight balanced, because if they change the tires and they add the rear wing, then the weight distribution changes completely. So they're gonna need a lot of tokens to fix that car, Peugeot. And Toyota has already spent many tokens, and this is their 4th year since the debut. So they're gonna do this and next year, and then they're gonna bring a new one. And Toyota was forced to change, I am sure, at least 3 tokens since the beginning, because they obviously built the car for the Le Mans hypercar regulations, and then everything changed when they merged together with the Le Mans Daytona hybrid, and so Toyota also was forced to change the tires and bring the bigger ones at the rear, and also change the weight distribution. They did so by lightening the mechanical engine side of the car, and so they fixed that. And this last year, Toyota was much improved compared to 2022. And Ferrari was barely saved because they were, I'm not sure I'm gonna say this correctly, they were late on their program, or rather, they were very fast with building the 499p. And so when these changes came in, they still had not validated the car, and they could bring the changes, and they basically fixed the car before validation. So the current car is actually meant for the current regulations. That was not the case with Peugeot, and that was the reason Peugeot has been underperforming so far. And Porsche brought upgrades, but only on the reliability side, so they still have not spent a token. And Cadillac, I think they're gonna bring one upgrade, and it's a weight distribution with only the WEC car, because IMSA and WEC have different kind of tracks. In WEC, the variety is wider, so they need a different weight distribution. And I think that's all with the differences. So the testing is all important for the newcomers, and the pecking order is basically the same as last year. What's more important to watch from testing is if teams have improved with their setup work, if they understand their car more, and eventually if they brought some tokens, some development which went under the radar and nobody expected it.
Yeah, great points there. Really, really agree with everything. I think I was going to add on as well with Porsche. I believe they also added on aerodynamic changes as well. Slight changes went unrecognized across the community. So they have that, and the aerodynamics. And Porsche is also bringing a crankshaft update towards, I think, at Sao Paulo. They might be bringing that. It's after Le Mans. So that's kind of cool as well. We kind of can see that from the prologue that Porsche seems to have very good opportunities there. But it's very similar to F1, the WEC testing. F1, you can barely tell like who's who. I mean, we can kind of guess that Red Bull's going to be very quick, judging by the testing session and judging by from what we've seen so far. But WEC, it's kind of the same. We don't really know. And the teams are kind of testing long run performance and reliability and all that sort of thing. They're not really going for outright pace, so I wouldn't judge anything off of the prologue just because we haven't really seen these true pace. Like, for instance, Lamborghini, they are testing long run pace. They haven't been going on the pace of the car. They haven't really shown how quick that SC63 is. And I would guess the same thing for the other new manufacturers as well. I think they're testing long-run endurance plans, and they've already done a ton of testing with their cars, but this is the first time where the WEC kind of comes into play. And I just want to mention something real quickly as well, because this is a very significant factor heading into this season. BOP, balance of performance, that's what it's called. Very different to F1. F1 doesn't really have this system in place. BOP is set to basically make everything equal and more competitive. But what this is that we can see the car's performance at one track be very competitive, and then it could completely be different at another track. So, for example, here at Qatar, Peugeot might have a very quick car judging by the BOP, where Toyota is the heaviest car on the grid, which could affect their performance. And this is another thing too, like, for example, I think we were talking about this earlier. We were talking about the lap times compared from LMP1, the old regulations, versus the new regulations of LMH and LMDH. At Le Mans in 2020, the last year of LMP1, the lap time of the Toyota TS050, the LMP1 car, was around a 3-minute 17. In 2021, the GR010, the new hypercar, was a 3-minute 27, so around 10 seconds slower than the LMP1. But the BOP also had a play in that as well. There was a slight change, of course. And that's another fascinating part about these regulations, is that, and the categories as well. Because Group C, we saw the convergence of regulations across the world with the Group C regulations. Here in the WEC and IMSA, we're seeing a very similar thing to what we saw in the 80s and 90s of the golden age of endurance racing, where cars were going across the world. LMH, LMDH, the first time we've seen them race in both IMSA and WEC. That is huge for the world of motorsport. And to see LMP1 turn into LMH and DPI turn into LMDH, it's incredibly fascinating. And the difference between Hypercar and GTP, I'm just going to mention this real quickly before we go into our prologue, is BOP. That is the difference between the two categories. Both regulations can race at both categories, but IMSA has their BOP, WEC has their BOP. So a Porsche 963 in IMSA could be very different to a Porsche 963 in the WEC, and that's down to the BOP and also the tracks that the IMSA cars race at.
So BOP is the entire reason behind how it is possible to have different regulations, but also different car concepts, because the main strength behind endurance racing is that the rules are very open. You can have a V6, a V8, a V10, you can have it naturally aspirated or turbocharged, and you can choose if it's monoturbo or biturbo, and you can choose if it's a 3 liter, a 5.5 liters, and that creates wide variety of cars. Like Cadillac is using a V8 5.5 liters engine, naturally aspirated. What this means is that the engine is quite bulky, heavy, and it brings limitations on what can be done on external aerodynamic, and it's also very heavy engine braking, but it offers great tractions and no degradation, and also no turbo lag, and so the electric motor can work, the battery can do other stuff other than fixing the turbo lag. So what we saw last year is that Cadillac is very good on the tires. They can go very long. They don't suffer degradation, and that was their strength. And then we have Toyota and Ferrari. Toyota and Ferrari have very similar car concepts. Both are hypercars. Both use V6 engines. Toyota is at 3.5 liters, Ferrari just at 3 liters, but at the end the performance is the same. We also see from the balance of performance, similar weights, similar power. Toyota is a bit heavier, but Ferrari a bit lighter, a bit less power than Toyota, so it balances out. And we also saw last year that Toyota had very good cornering speed. Ferrari had excellent aerodynamic efficiency, and you could see it at Spa and Mans. That's the reason Ferrari was very competitive there. And but these differences are also down to the faults of the balance of performance system, especially last year. So what did WEC do last year with the balance of performance? Before seeing the cars on track on how they perform, for the validation of the car, they run a lot of tests in the wind tunnel. They get the aerodynamic efficiency, they get the peak downforce the car can produce, and all stuff like that. They get their map, they get their data, and then they draw a balance of performance. Last year, to be as fair as possible, this balance of performance was kept until Le Mans, so for the first 3 races. It was not changed, and that was very good for transparency. It means that they weren't going to use the balance of performance as a success ballast to hinder the better cars, the better teams, but rather to balance the car. And if you do a better job, you create a faster car, then you should see on track that the car is faster. But this approach is fair, but it's faulty, because just from the wind tunnel, you cannot get the real data, what you see on track when a car actually runs. And as an example, Toyota and Ferrari were very similar. They should have gotten the same balance of performance. They should have the same characteristics But instead, in reality, when they actually ran on track, Toyota was better in cornering, Ferrari was better in aerodynamic efficiency than it was predicted from the wind tunnel. And so that is no longer, if you try to be fair with the balance of performance, you cannot actually balance properly the cars. And if you look at what happens on track, then you risk using the balance of performance as a success ballast. And that is not what they want to do, because that was the problem with the previous generation, with the LMP1s. The balance of performance was changed each race, and so teams were trying to hold back their cars until Le Mans came, and then they unleashed everything they had, hoping that since they held back their cars previously, they would get a better, a more favorable BOP for Le Mans. And so this is not good, but if you try to be fair, you cannot actually balance properly. So the balance of performance is the main crux of the puzzle, the main problem, the main issue to fix to make this category perfect.
Definitely, because I remember last year there was a bit of controversy with Ferrari winning because Toyota was given additional ballast last minute. Am I correct?
Yes, they were impacted by the balance of performance. I can't remember. I think it was more on power. I can't remember exactly. But Ferrari, their car went better, and I think that there was kind of a miscommunication. I think between just everybody in general, because some people said that Ferrari was basically cheating, or they were given an advantage. But that wasn't necessarily the case. It was a factor. BOP did kind of favor them, but also the track of Le Mans also favored Ferrari. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I remember that was a big talking point.
For sure, yeah.
As you said, it's hard to predict what's going to happen in endurance, and testing isn't a certainty at all in terms of assumptions. But what are 3 points you would just take out from the prologue we got a few days ago?
Well, I think the 3 points in terms of all the WEC, one of which is that Porsche looked very competitive. They topped every single session with the customer and factory-backed efforts. And while we can't really take everything from it, Porsche's long run pace, the pace of the car looks very strong, and I think they could be challenging not just for the win in Qatar, but the win across the championship as well. And that's a pretty bold claim, I'd say, considering where Porsche were last year. They were fighting, I think, for third in the championship with Cadillac. Behind Ferrari and Toyota, they seriously did not have the pace. But as we saw, in Fuji, Porsche was able to challenge Toyota. Then at Bahrain, Porsche was very competitive, able to challenge Ferrari. Toyota was in another league of their own, but that's acceptable. But Porsche is definitely in a good place as we head into this season. And another point I wanted to mention on that is because the BOP is not super favoring them. So that makes me think if they're going to be competitive at Qatar and the BOP is not favoring them as much, that means they probably have a very strong car. And what happens when the BOP does favor them? So we'll see. Another point I want to mention as well is the BOP hopefully working throughout this season. I think that the BOP is working pretty well as we see through Qatar. It's much better than the last year. And a third point, because I know Ace, you have your hands up, so I want to get to you. But a third point is that LMGT3 looks incredibly competitive. McLaren showing that they have the pace pretty early, but it's hard to tell because there's so many manufacturers so close together on lap times, on reliability, on consistency, and all that sort of thing. All 9 manufacturers look competitive. All drivers are excited for this season, and LMGT3 in its very first season is showing that it can not just challenge the GTE era of its prime, but beat it in its first ever season. So those are 3 points: Porsche, BOP, Porsche and Hypercar, and of course the LMGT3 grid showing that they have the pace.
Yeah, so Porsche last year, towards the end after Le Mans, shined. They were battling and beating Ferrari, and they were also at times challenging Toyota, although Toyota clearly was the best car and won everything, in fact. But it's hard to understand if it's actually Porsche improving, understanding their car more, or it was down to simply a balance of performance, because after Le Mans, before Monza, they changed the balance of performance and they brought Ferrari much closer to Toyota, and so Ferrari was in that more, and so it's hard to understand if it was actually Porsche improving or Ferrari being held back. What we can see is from IMSA, in which Porsche also was racing other Le Mans Daytona hybrids, and in this case it was challenging Cadillac, and Cadillac at the end won both titles, but along the season Porsche closed up on Cadillac, so it really looks like Porsche has improved. They had a problem last year. I'm gonna look. Main problem is drivability. The issues lie on the particular design of the front suspension and the steering kinematics. Allegedly, the pump of the power steering isn't strong enough due to the suspension. Furthermore, the car tends to lock the inside tire under turning braking when the loft shifts laterally, and so those are the issue Porsche should fix. Those are the issue we believe they're gonna fix with their first token. We don't know if no. Jonah said they spent the first token already with aerodynamic upgrades, so maybe they fix this, and if they fix this, then the car is very good, because Porsche last year was extremely good on traction.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly point out real quickly that you're totally right. I think Porsche has got the pace, and it's possible that they're keeping this a secret. You know, Porsche's the thing is that with Porsche is that they seem to really keep things a secret, and then they full-blown attack everybody and say, all right, we're quick, but they don't really mention it as much. They don't really give any hints. They just do what they do, and they do it really good. Another thing I wanted to mention as well is Ace, you mentioned that IMSA, they were pretty competitive. Rolex 24, they of course won, and they were very competitive in that race. And if we looked at the 2023 edition of the Rolex 24 at IMSA, Porsche had extreme reliability issues, weren't really on the pace compared to the Acuras or the Cadillacs, but they seem to have very strong pace on 24-hour laps, and that got them the victory, that they were able to be consistent. And every single Porsche entry didn't have any huge reliability issues. They were the most consistent car across the entire event. They were the only manufacturer to not run into the huge reliability problems. And I just want to quickly point out as well, what we saw from Porsche in 2023 versus 2024, hopefully getting very competitive, reminds me of the LMP1 days. 2014 at Le Mans, they were kind of there, but they have reliability issues. They weren't super competitive against Toyota and Audi. And remember, this was the first time they entered the LMP1 category. Then in 2015, they blew the competition away and won Le Mans. Are we going to see a very similar story here with the 963? Its debut season didn't really go good, was kind of showing its potential, but then as we come into 2024, it shows that it is the car to beat. And Pipo Derani, Cadillac driver for Action Express, he mentioned in an interview, I think with Sports Car 365, that if there's any manufacturer on the grid the car hasn't been tapped with its potential and is potentially going to be the manufacturer to beat, it's Porsche. So just something to point out there.
So Porsche last year had serious reliability issues, we saw that, and they improved along the year. Towards the end, they didn't have as much issues with reliability. But what surprised me last year was Ferrari, because Ferrari only had 2 cars, only in WEC, and they rushed more their project than Porsche actually did. When they did testing before the championship began, they only built 2 cars. One did reliability testing, and one did performance testing. And they begin, and they almost have no issue, no reliability problems. They had one issue at Portimao, and then one electronic issue during Le Mans, nothing else. I'm genuinely impressed by Ferrari, which was able to pull this off, because it's unexpected.
Yeah, definitely, because Toyota had been dominating the top category for so many years, and Alpine had started just challenging, but that was mostly a case of BOP, and everyone knows that. And then now we might actually have some proper competition with Porsche, Ferrari, and obviously Toyota is going to have to try to hold on to their crown. And well, that brings us to an end in terms of performance. A very last question I had for you three, so Peter, Jonah, and Ace. I love the design of those hypercars, and that's one thing that I wasn't so fond of during the Toyota dominant years. The LMP ones during those times, I didn't really like that big shark fin that would go behind the car, and we know how important design and aesthetic is to endurance cars, because that's how they get remembered, through whether that's through video games, Gran Turismo, or just in folklore. You don't remember drivers or teams as much as the cars and the liveries and the design. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you guys, what do you think of the current design, the aesthetic, and does it have what I would call just does it have this little plus that makes a car iconic in terms of livery?
I mean, look at compare Alpine's F1 car to their hypercar, and you'll immediately see what the F1 car is lacking, which is paint. It's actually blue. I mean, the Alpine, the hypercar looks stunning, and I love that the Alpine logo is the rear lights as well, the A. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned much earlier, Jonah, about how one Ferrari is red and the other one is yellow. So you can immediately recognize them, as opposed to in Formula One, where between teammates, maybe the top of the top of the engine cover is a different color where the camera is, because you can't see the helmet half the time because of the halo anyway. Yeah, they've always been really gorgeous cars in Le Mans. I mean, going back 20 years or more, the ones that I know from playing Gran Turismo, they always have had very unique. They always look different from one another and quite unique. In the 1980s, there was more of a uniform design from what I remember, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how a lot of the other ones look. I can picture. I mean, I actually have a Lego kit of, I think it's the Porsche. I got it for Christmas, and I did a live stream of me building it. I've got a model of that somewhere. But the others, yeah, I mean, they all do just look good, and they look mean, and they're not just black and carbon fiber because they're trying to save weight by not painting them.
Yeah, you make a good point there that the hypercars, like compared to F1, I mean, they have paint. You know, they're interesting. You know, I think here's the thing: like hypercar is really incredible, but you could also say that some of the old cars are cool as well. I have an example here. This is a Lego Porsche 963. This car is very cool, but then we also have this car as well. This is a Ferrari from a long time ago. I know these are Lego examples, but I keep them on my table all the time. And they're both cool. I don't think there's like one's cooler than the other. They're just both cool in general. However, Group C had its pizzazz, as we call it. It had the design of all these manufacturers involved there. You had the Jaguars, you had the Mercedes, you had the McLarens, you had the Peugeots, you had all these different designs. And I think the fact is that we can never really get back to Group C. Group C was its own thing. I mean, we had the 787B, which was as loud as the 2004 F1 Ferrari, for example, to be honest. Hypercar, I think, has some of what Group C had, where the design of the cars are unique. They're interesting. They kind of show what the cars kind of say. I mean, it's kind of interesting in that way. I think hypercar is also kind of taking from the GT1 days, when it took from the actual road car and turned it into a car fighting for overall victories. that was one thing that IMSA had really down, and the same with WEC. You can see when you look at the Acura ARX 06 or kind of the Cadillac, you can see that there's similarities to their road cars versus their actual race cars as well. And that makes people like me and you guys want to go dive into that, maybe look into a car on the road or whatever. Another fascinating thing too is that the Le Mans hypercar regulations, they allow the manufacturer to build a road car of that race car, kind of like what GT1 was like. It's optional, it's not required, which is kind of cool. But it is an option there for teams. For instance, the Aston Martin Valkyrie road car, that's out on track. But that car is going to be racing at Le Mans in 2025 and in the WEC, just the AMR Pro version of it. So it's actually a road car just converted into an actual hypercar. And that's only for the LMH regulations, not for the LMDH regulations, which have to be on a specific chassis from one of the 4 manufacturers of Multimatic, Orica, Dallara, and I believe Ligier, which Lamborghini is using. But yeah, overall, I think that the design of each car is unique. It's cool. I think that they've captured what Group C had a long time ago. It's not the same, but as I explained in these 2 Lego examples, they're both cool. There's not one that's better than the other, I guess. They're both cool in that way. And I gotta say real quickly while I'm on the topic, that Peugeot 9X8 hypercar has to be one of the most interesting designs I have seen in quite some time of my endurance racing career on YouTube. That car's design is cool, but not just that, but that livery. How striking does that look? It's like a rainbow swirl coming in, totally different to the gray, and I've liked that they've kept that for 2024. The car, of course, will look different with the Evo spec coming out Imola. But overall, the Peugeot 9X8 is a great example of how cool the design is, how unique it is, and just how individually manufacturer-based it is as well, with a lot of road car designs heading into the hypercar designs.
Yeah, one point I want to add is that hypercars, they're all elegant, they're all curvy, they're all refined. Their external aerodynamics, their chassis, but Lamborghini is beautiful, è bellissima. You look at the car, it's all squared. It's not continuous, it's not curvy, it's squared. You can look at the cars on the track without any livery, all carbon black, and you'd recognize the Lamborghini everywhere. It's the only one with the squared shapes. It's beautiful, it's a Lamborghini. You look at it, it's a Lamborghini, and this idea of instead of making the external aerodynamics all continuous, all curvy, all refined, of making this box, these angles, these squares, it's in an interesting design choice, and both for for the aesthetics, and both for performance of the car, aerodynamic behavior.
Yeah, definitely. So there are so many striking cars in WEC, and the reason I asked this is that, yeah, Formula One this year, half the cars are just black, and last year they were all dark blue. That's the thing. Last year it was dark blue as a design choice, but this year they're just carbon fiber because they're trying to save weight, and it's just tragic, really, because the design and the looks are what make up for a lot of what makes those cars iconic.
So Alpine has decided to use, let me see, V6 3.4 liters engine, but that's not the important point. The important point of Alpine's engine is that it's the Formula 2 Mechachrome engine. They simply bought it, they brought it to Viry-Châtillon, they upgraded it so it can, instead of doing 620, it can do the 710 horsepowers, and they do the reliability fixes, they write the software for the battery use, but it's a Mechachrome engine, the Formula 2 one. It's Alpine talked about its project that the idea behind their car is simplicity, making stuff as simple as possible so that we can use it effectively. I don't know if this engine is gonna actually work. We saw in Formula One very subtly on it wasn't properly funded by Renault, so that's the main reason it's lagging behind. But it's also true that it's lagging behind. I remember in 2021, they made a lot of talks. They had the fans. They were gonna catch and finally reach the other three engine manufacturers. And then we come last year, we find out they're 15 horsepower down, and that's also probably the main reason why this year Alpine looks doomed. And now in endurance they do this choice of choosing the Formula 2 engine. I just we'll see if it works, or if it flops. Another thing I wanna add is Ferrari, because previously I talked about the tokens of development, but I forgot to mention Ferrari. So Ferrari is probably gonna bring these tokens after Le Mans, because what Ferrari has to fix is bringing a bit more load, more downforce, even if it means a bit more aerodynamic resistance. But the idea is they're not gonna do that before Le Mans, because before Le Mans there is Spa and Le Mans, which Ferrari was very good with aerodynamic efficiency. So the idea is they're gonna make use of the better aerodynamic efficiency in Spa and Le Mans. Then they're gonna bring the first tokens to fix the car and make it better, and then we'll see. And I don't think I have anything else left to talk.
Well, Peter, I was just going to say we had the Formula 2 preview yesterday. What do you think of Alpine using those Mechachrome engines in a 24-hour race?
I mean, it sounds like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, so to speak, that maybe the WEC Alpine branch maybe is just as disorganized as the F1 branch. Yeah, I mean...
maybe Otmar Schopenhauer has already been transferred there.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously this has been... It's always astonished me that obviously in endurance racing you can get cars that can run for 24 hours, and in Formula 1 we struggle to get cars that can run for 90 minutes without something going kaput. I mean, these days reliability is better, but only a few years ago it was still terrible for a lot of teams. Yeah, that's an interesting one I don't see, because those things are not designed to run for more than an hour at the most in Formula 2. And when Williams ran Mechachrome engines in '98, those weren't brilliant either. So yeah, well, I don't know if that's going to work out so well for them.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Just before you close up, Peter, we've heard a lot about Verstappen wanting to go into endurance racing. What do you think about this idea that Verstappen and Alonso would eventually file in a hypercar entry and just take it to Le Mans?
I mean, Alonso, he's done Le Mans before, so I'm sure he'd love to do it again. Did he win it?
Yes, twice.
He did. Yeah, it was Indy that he didn't win. Didn't get the Triple Crown, and Hulkenberg's won it even. Yeah, Alonso would do it again. I mean, Alonso, he doesn't have a life outside of racing. He doesn't do anything else, so he'll just keep doing stuff like this. And Max is the same, because all he does is sim racing when he's at home, and he's already done half the practice. Yeah, he may as well do it. Whether or not he's allowed to while he's still racing for Red Bull remains to be seen, but I think we should let them. It should be like in the 60s when everyone used to do everything and now they're just not allowed to. When they say it's because of risk of injury, and it's like, well, these days the risk of injury is so much smaller than it was 50 years ago or whatever, that just let them diversify a bit in terms of what they race.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because Fernando, if I'm not mistaken, from my knowledge of F1, he raced at the Indy 500 in 2017 when he was supposed to race at the Monaco Grand Prix with Jenson Button hopping in the McLaren for that race. So why can't, if a driver is able to race at Indy, why is that not possible at Le Mans? And the reason why is because a lot of drivers have said that they want to race Le Mans. Charles Leclerc and his brother Arthur want to race with Ferrari at Le Mans. They even expressed interest in racing the 499P, maybe a fourth customer car. Gasly has also wanted to race with Alpine, and same goes for, of course, Fernando and Verstappen as well. They've expressed a lot of interest, and I might comment on that as well. Verstappen and Alonso, the question is not about if for me, it's about when. When are they going to do that? They've made it clear that they want to. And for me, it's like which team, which manufacturer, which entry would they want to go to? GT sounds realistic, but I think the best option for both Alonso and Verstappen, and this is, of course, if Alonso doesn't go to Mercedes in 2025, but Aston Martin, the Valkyrie, I think I could see potentially Verstappen and Alonso coming in for the Aston Martin Valkyrie project in 2025 or 6 or something like that, if, of course, F1 allows them in. And the reason why I say this is because Alonso's a part of Aston Martin through F1. Verstappen is a part of Red Bull, and Red Bull, Adrian Newey was connected through the Valkyrie there. And while there's not a lot of Red Bull influence in that car today, maybe there's still connections. Maybe Verstappen would want to be okay with doing that, especially with Alonso on board. So yeah, I think Aston Martin would be the best for that. But yeah, I guess the question I'm still wondering today is why F1 doesn't allow a driver to race at Le Mans, but does allow them to race at Indy 500, like Alonso did in 2017.
So the answer to that question would be, and you have to answer me, how the weekend of Le Mans works. It's all within 1 week, or there are all within 1 week? Okay,
yes.
So I'd say the reason it doesn't work is because if they put a race weekend overlapping with the Le Mans race weekend, I guess a driver can... But I don't think they are prohibited from choosing Le Mans over a Formula 1 race. I just think that they don't do it because they're already doing 24 races over 52 weeks a year, and then they need to do their programs. And Alonso took the IndyCar Challenge very seriously. He prepared a lot. He did a lot of tests. He did a lot of practice sessions. At IndyCar, there are many practice sessions weeks before the actual race. So if a driver from Formula 1 hops into Le Mans with no experience and tries to learn everything within 3-4 days, it just doesn't work out and they underperform. So I think that's the reason drivers in Formula 1 say, yeah, we really would like to do a Le Mans race, but it's impossible. It's because they cannot prepare well enough for the race. Alonso, when he did Le Mans, and he did very well, he prepared a lot. In 2018 in McLaren, he wasn't committed to the year, because if we remember, he also started halfway through the year the Le Mans, the WEC season championship, and he also prepared a lot for that championship. And then when he went to Dakar, he prepared since September the previous years a lot of tests with rally cars in the deserts. And I think that's the reason drivers tend to switch as they wish to Le Mans or even other races categories, because they simply cannot prepare, and they would flop, they would disappoint, and that's not good on them. So they simply don't do those races. Another question is, who do you think would be the third driver? Because Alonso, Verstappen, but we need a third driver.
I always thought it would make sense for it to be Jenson Button, and then they just go with an all-firing F1 championship, F1 champion lineup. Another one I remember seeing Lando was interested. I'm not sure he would, because Lando and Fernando Alonso, they did the 24 hours of Daytona together in 2017. So it's weird to think about, because Lando is not really the first guy you would think about for endurance racing, but he did it before he got his seat. So My personal thought would be between Button and Lando if they want it, because Lando is one of Max's best friends as well and gets along well with Alonso. But they might just go for a known quantity in WEC and go for someone like a Pierre Guidi for all we know.
I thought that maybe a very left-field choice, but possible because he also has ties with Aston Martin. So Vettel, Alonso, Vettel, Verstappen, they absolutely win that race if the car doesn't retire. I'm sure
that depends on Vettel, because I saw that as well. That would be the ideal option, especially because Vettel, Aston Martin, there's the affiliation there as well. But that just depends on Vettel. Does he want to go back to racing, and does he want to commit to a 24-hour Le Mans race? So we'll see.
I think he could be persuaded if it's just a one-off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that brings this to a close. I mean, for me, I've learned a lot, but obviously, normally, as I said, I only really pay attention to Le Mans, and a lot of my patchy understanding of even the history comes from basically playing Gran Turismo a lot. But no, it sounds really exciting to have this many entries in Hypercar and the other category, and quite a variety of drivers as well. So busy weekend of Formula 1, 2, and 3, but if I can try and fit in some of the Qatar race around that, I'll see if I can.
Yeah, definitely worth it. I'll be trying to at least follow the start, and definitely will tune into some of those updates.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be exciting. This is the start of a new golden age, I feel, for endurance racing. The likes we haven't seen since the Group C era in 80s and 90s, and that was hugely successful. And now we're seeing the return of that through LMH and LMDH, the regulations of Hypercar, and even GTP over in IMSA as well. But yeah, this is going to be absolutely incredible. I mean, Le Mans exclusively, we're going to see 23 hypercars on the grid, potentially 24 if the Proton entry gets on there as well, which is something we've never seen. If 24 happens, that's great, because 24 hypercars, 2024 Le Mans, and 24-hour endurance race all in one, all the 24s. That would be absolutely incredible. But yeah, golden era of motorsport, absolutely incredible. WEC is going to kick off on March 2nd with the Qatar 12 kilometer, and yeah, the 2024 season is going to be amazing, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, a lot to look forward to there. So yeah, thank you as ever to Nav and Ace, and thank you to Jonah. So where can people find you on the airwaves?
So you can find me over on Formula Jonah YouTube. It's named as Formula Jonah. I do content creation on WEC and IMSA, as well as all endurance racing. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Discord as well here. But primarily I post content on YouTube and a few updates on Instagram and Twitter as well.
You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify, and you can also find us on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.